And we are live for our 40th episode of Absolute AppSec. I am Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back, I guess, right? This is our holiday episode. As you can see between Ken and I and our festive hats this time around, we just have to have something, right? For this time of year, Ken. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, you got to make it merry and festive, you know. Like we weren't around in December of 2017, so we are around for this this is our first holiday season as a podcast.
Yeah. Yep, that's good. I did send out some T-shirts to some of the guests. I think they've already gotten them. I think, Ken, you're still waiting on yours, but they should be showing up soon enough. If you've been on before and you're listening, send me your physical address and a T-shirt size, and I'll make sure and put you on the list for the next batch as they go out. I've already had a couple of people reach out, and we'll get them out to everybody as quickly as we can, as reasonable over the holidays. This week, we don't have a guest. It's just Ken and I. We're just going to be kind of reprising what we've done over the last year, right? 40 episodes in and how things are going, and then talk about current events. There's quite a bit. It seems like every week there's another breach or another 5 breaches or 10, whatever. Just like we talked about last week with Jerry, how it just seems like the pace is increasing, and we don't really know how much data is out there and how much is actually being exploited and who's exploiting it. So we'll talk a little bit about breaches. I don't think we specifically have an AppSec minute that we defined for tonight. The guests that we did have dropped off a little bit, so we'll just jump straight into it, right? Ken, is there anything that you wanted to specifically start with before we go into code reviews or anything else?
Yeah, no, couple things actually. For one, I got the T-shirts. So the T-shirts.
Oh, you did?
I totally forgot to mention that, and I just noticed your T-shirt, and I thought I should say something to Seth. And then the other part was for the AppSec minute. If you have something that you would like us to talk about, if you have just anything that you want us to kind of expand on from an educational standpoint for like 5 minutes, first 5 minutes of the podcast, send that to absoluteappsec@gmail.com. Again, that's absoluteappsec@gmail.com.
Yeah. Maybe if we're not going to jump into, like, if we don't have anything specific, let's talk a little bit about kind of the vulnerabilities that we've been dealing with lately, right? I'm not sure what, working for GitHub, right? Like, I'm not sure what sort of PRs or whatever you've been doing. One of my things recently has been I've been doing a lot of mobile apps, right? And it's pretty interesting to play with data on, like, sensitive data being stored on a mobile application. First of all, I know when we've had Kevin Cody on before, we've talked about the difficulty in maintaining like jailbreaks when it comes to mobile application security testing. That is and always will be a difficult thing, especially on the iOS side. I am looking for recommendations on the Android side. I'm going to upgrade my own instances. So Kevin or anybody, if you're listening and you've got a recommendation on one that works well, let me know what it is. Otherwise, from a data perspective, one of the things that I constantly see in mobile applications is backgrounded screens that are not protected, right? And this is it's a very easy fix, but it's a very common vulnerability. It seems like most mobile app developers don't necessarily think about what happens when the user presses the home screen and forgets that maybe if you're on a credit card entry page or a password change page or something like that, that the devices take an actual screenshot of the application and store it on disk. And that screenshot is retrievable if you happen to have physical device access. It's become more difficult on iOS to get that data back out. But the other thing is like you can see very quickly if you just double click on the home button in iOS what is actually stored by the device. And as it launches the application or relaunches the application from the background, it uses that as the initial screenshot before, as it loads the application, and it tells the application to become active again. So I see it very common within like mobile, what do I want to say? Like shopping applications, for instance, right? You put in a credit card number, you background the process, and all of a sudden your device is basically violating PCI because it's storing that in plain text inside of a JPEG or a PNG or something else. But it's very easy to fix. There's, you can look online. Anyway, it was just something that I've seen quite a bit in the last little bit. Ken, anything from you?
I had just a question, because like the last time I haven't done mobile app stuff in a long, long time. Last time I looked was, we'll say it's 2018, probably like 5 years ago when I was doing like semi, regular mobile app testing. At that time with iOS, when you typed things in to sort of work on their auto correction, they would record what you've typed in, everything you've typed in, into one giant blob, and then ship that off to their servers. Obviously, when you're typing in like passwords and stuff like that, and sensitive communication, like how are apps disabling that? I assume it's something at that time you literally had to write your own keyboard. That's why I'm asking, and I assume it's not that way anymore. I'm assuming iOS gives you APIs to like options to like limit what you're typing getting stored by their autocorrect.
Yeah, function. They do. Like there's some flags in Xcode now if you're actually building a screen. If you throw something like secure text entry on there, you can enable or disable autocomplete from there, or you can do it programmatically. There's APIs to do that. We don't, like, I definitely see it on like the credit card entry forms, passwords, things of that nature. But most of the time developers just use whatever text field and what the defaults are, right? So it still exists, that autocomplete issue. It doesn't necessarily send it directly to Apple. It just does like local to what is in your autocomplete database already. So your phone or your device actually learns about you over time. So if you happen to type in like Ken all the time, right, it's going to default to that as the autocomplete, as opposed to something else, right?
So is this file retrievable if someone say picks up the iPhone, like they want to like, assuming apps don't do it right, they don't, they just allow whatever you're typing in their app to be stored. Is that easily retrievable by someone who gets access to your phone?
If the phone is locked, no, right? That is definitely one of the things that gets backed up with the device. That database, that autocomplete database. That's why you always want to encrypt your backups when it comes to iOS. If you're backing up to iCloud, it's encrypted by default. But if the device is locked, that's not going to be retrievable. There's more and more trust checks that go on when you're actually plugging a device into a mobile device into a new Mac, right? You have to actually trust a device now. It doesn't just automatically, your iPhone doesn't automatically trust a device that you plug into it, and it won't allow it to retrieve anything or back up until you actually tell the phone that you want to trust a computer, right?
Right.
So Apple's come a long way when it comes to that stuff. It's not quite the Wild West it was 5 years ago when we first started looking into it. But developers still make mistakes. We still see it quite often.
Speaking of backups, I learned the value of backups yesterday, as a matter of fact. I needed an older version of Java 8 on my machine. When I installed Mojave's latest update, I believe that it installed Java 9. So I removed the Java 9 references using, and this is like, whatever, don't judge me, I use Stack Overflow or something
on purpose.
Like
is that what's
I know I did. I removed these folders anyways. Turns out they're pretty important. Yeah, be aware if you're removing Java 9 folders in Mojave, it actually like it actually seems to break things. So I'm not really figured out why, or assuming it needs it, Java 9, but yeah, that was a big problem. So anyways, everything's back to normal now, but still stuck with Java 9 for the moment.
Okay. Yeah, that's yeah. Well, you can roll back, right? You should be able to download that binary and install both of them.
Yeah, I've done that. I've installed both of them, but yeah, it was an interesting holy crap moment. So, but yeah, so I think we wanted to roll on into, which thing do we want to talk about? We could talk about the Google hearings. We could talk about the breaches. I mean, the Equifax report came out. So
let's start with the Google breach. I think that'll be an easy one. We had a discussion last week on breaches, right? The tweet that I put out was, if we're notified of a breach and no one reports on it, did it really happen? I think Chris or a couple other people retweeted it. But we've reached that breach fatigue level. And I mean, Google's obviously the biggest one that's come out this week. Or do you know of any others?
This week, not sure that I've seen anything. I can't be sure. It's Tuesday, right? So if we're going by Monday, yesterday, I'm sure something's come out, but I haven't seen it. I haven't been on Twitter much, and heads down.
Yeah. What, you have a job? I don't understand.
I know, right? I got to actually earn a paycheck. What the heck?
The breaches. Let me see what else is there. I thought wasn't there a website that tracks data breaches? Have you seen that before?
But I'm also old and my memory sucks. And while you're digging that up, I mean, there's two different. While you're digging that up, I'll mention that there's two different things to discuss. There's the Google Plus breach, and then there's the Google hearings, which basically they did not get discussed. So Congress had the CEO of Google for 3 hours, and all they could do was really talk about essentially, the various search results that they've come across, the Republicans, that essentially were biased towards making them look bad. That's ultimately what it is. It's like accusing Google of having purposefully listed conservative type content and positive mentions of these Republican representatives, just kind of shoving that down in their search algorithm. And that was really what they focused on for the 3 hours. However, things they didn't discuss were like the censored Google engine that Google is working on for China. I think it's like Project Dragonfly. Okay. They didn't talk about the breach. They didn't talk about, and by the way, and yes, Google has gotten a bad rap lately for censoring and especially on YouTube, demonetizing certain types of channels, which you don't hear a lot of people talk about. I mean, one of the, me, I like to shoot guns, right? I like to collect guns. That's my thing. And so pro Second Amendment gun channels have been demonetized. You don't hear a lot about that. So it's certainly a thing, sure, but I feel like there were other things that could have been discussed of some relevance, and kind of digging in on like, what is Google up to? And yeah, I just feel like the breaches didn't go, like it was a wasted opportunity, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because they have had Zuckerberg or Facebook, in front of them multiple times, and he's been in the UK as well, and they have grilled him on privacy data, right? And what Facebook is actually doing with people's data. And I don't understand why Google gets a pass, from those same sorts of questions. It seems like Google has maybe even more data than Facebook does when you start thinking about Gmail and everything else that the Google services that are provided, whereas Facebook's just social media information, right? I mean, I guess you've got, Facebook and Instagram and their other services. But it's not quite, it doesn't necessarily descend to that same level. I mean, if I'm looking at it from a strict, hey, I want to find out about someone perspective, Facebook is great, but Google's even better because it has more than just social data. It's got financial data. It's got bank information that's being sent to them. It's got everything else.
Well, that was part of what came out of the hearings, is that they, fully admit to what we already knew, which was storing the contents and being able to analyze the contents of your email discussions, of your phone's serial number, your address, your location, your gender, your age, your basically collating that data, sorting that data, and having it referenceable, right? And creating, essentially having the ability to basically know you, right? I think that's the power that Google wields.
Yeah.
And it's a bit scary. I mean, we all know this. We still use Google, and they had also mentioned data collection from Google Home, which I know with Amazon Echo, it's only when your voice is on. And I know we've talked about various slip ups where the audio keeps recording. But yeah, I mean, so it's a known thing. It's a known thing that this happens, at least with Echo. But I felt like, and I'd have to I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I felt like what came out of that was that there was a little bit more collected by Google. I could be wrong.
And it wouldn't surprise me, right? Like, I mean, they had those issues with, Google Maps. You think about everything that Google touches, right? You've got Google Home, but that's always tied into Nest as well, right? Which is cameras and everything else that Nest provides, tied to maps, tied to phone, devices as you're walking into your house. It knows where you're at, knows who you're talking to. There's so much more information there and like relevant live data than there is with than there really is with Facebook. Even though Facebook is listening to a lot of that stuff, we know that they are. It just seems like Google should be, held more accountable to that. And I guess every company should be. We get a little tinfoil hatty in the security industry when we talk about those things. But it's hard to make recommendations to family on, hey, guess what? You should go buy an Echo Dot or an Echo because it's useful. Right?
Yeah, and I forget. And yeah, I will actually. I'm not going to go down this road. So tell us more about the Google Plus breach.
Okay, Google Plus breach. When I started looking into it, let's see, where's my link? We'll post it there. I got a whole bunch of links up from us talking. It affects what, 50, it was like 50 million, 52.5 million users. And it has caused Google to announce that they're going to actually end of life Google Plus in April as opposed to August. I think the cost of running it is just too much. The thing that was interesting to me was they released that there was this breach, but the only information that was included in the breach was name, email address, age, and occupation. Right? So it didn't even go to the level of credentials or password hashes. I realize that it's PII from a name and email address, age perspective, but the severity doesn't necessarily look like it's that. It's as bad as something like the Experian breach, right? So it really makes me question what else they found when they were looking at it, that they decided, all right, we're going to up the date of our closing for Google Plus because of because of this breach.
Yeah, Google Plus, it should have been end of EOL'd a long time ago. I'm trying to catch up as well on something Jason posted here. Writable Files API. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, the data that was harvested wasn't super terrible, I guess. And honestly, it's funny because but did it talk to anything about, did they speak to any, I can't talk words tonight. Me can't speak. Did they discuss at all like how the breach occurred?
It was basically they missed it was insecure direct object reference is what it boils down to. So with one of their APIs, if you're a third party developers, you could actually look up information even though it wasn't shared publicly. Right?
Oh, okay.
So based on an email address, you could pull that back. The other thing that's interesting is they announced this, and then they also said, well, we went back through our logs and no third party compromised our systems. Right? So there was no evidence that it actually got breached. It was just, hey, there was this flaw and we fixed it. And the access only existed for 6 days. So like, this goes back to the breach fatigue discussion that we had last week. It's like we're over reporting and we're overestimating the severity of these breaches. Like that's what it feels like when I went and I read through the data that was in there. I was like, huh, all right. So you had a flaw, you fixed the flaw, and you reported a breach, even though you have no evidence that the breach actually happened. And you have good logs to actually determine whether or not it existed. So I guess they're saying there could be a case where they wouldn't have logged that information. Otherwise, why even report the breach?
And you know, there's kind of, yeah, I do. And by the way, I'm also trying to grok sort of this whole writable files API link that Jason pasted in here. Give a significant. Well, I think I can save that as I still try to decipher what this is. Are you familiar with the writable files API at all?
I'm not. That's not one that I've dealt with. I'll pull it up. Jason posted that in our Slack channel. If you're not in there, go to our website. Go to our website and join us. Right? There's a lot of smart people in there that are smarter than Ken and I that have a lot to say. So
this is what happens when the days get shorter, you know, and the holidays roll around and start getting kind of. I'm telling you, it's like some kind of fog that you get into. But on this note, you know, talking about IDOR, I think I'd like to bring up my little rant of the day, which is discussing code review, the taboo of code review, timeline and man hours spent. So you know my sort of take on this, Seth. Well, we both have the same take, right?
Jump into it. Just keep going. Just keep going. I'll be right back.
Okay, cool. So when Seth and I give our course, one of the things we talk about, and we get questions from this on students, there's always, or there have been a couple, in the couple instances, we had a few students per class that were like, basically, I get 10 or I get 15 hours to review a web app, and it's on some sort of sprint or something along those lines. And then I have to move on. And I guess the way this works is that a scanner runs, some results are produced, and the idea is you're supposed to review those results, and that is classifying that app as having been code reviewed in a little checkbox. And that's complete shit. And Seth and I have, you know, again, we walked through our whole code review methodology. But like there's a few points there. So first of all, a lot of understanding things like IDOR, what we just talked about with this whole exploit with the Google API, a missed IDOR finding, very difficult to detect with code review tools alone, right? Like I will say with Brakeman specifically, there are when certain model objects call something like .find and pass in user input directly, it does at least flag on that. But most static analysis tools aren't very helpful at finding IDOR, and sometimes the insecure direct object references a couple different things that failed. So getting back to like understanding these deeper level, like something that's not super obvious, things that are super obvious that you can get out of a 10 or 15 hour kind of code review tool, ran a scan. Basically, is the same crap that you can regex for, right? Like maybe some unsafe serialization API gets called. Maybe you find some SQL injection. Maybe you find some command calls. And some of the super basic stuff, like maybe if you've got a templating language, you can certainly look for, different dangerous template character operators or methods, right? Easy stuff. The problem is, so anything that matters though, anything that's contextual, if you've got 10 or 15 hours, like you don't understand what you're looking at. And the things that are hard to actually find can't be done in 10 to 15 hours. And you're not giving yourself a real code review. What you should do, definitely don't call it a code review if you're going to do that. If you want to like say, hey, we ran this essentially this regex check and send a notification to both your security team and your development team, alerting on having found that, great. But that is not a full code review. That's not contextual. It doesn't help.
And that's so. Yeah. So Ken, just to jump in as you're going there, this is one thing that I find we do a poor job at in security and application security in general, is the classification of what we actually do. Right? There's no standard for what a code review is, like a secure code review. There's no standard for what an application assessment actually means. Right? When you and I started doing things, it was very much, hey, we're running AppScan or Web Inspect, we're checking that, and then we're adding in, these 10 or 15 other things that we're actually going to check for, right? Whether that's the OWASP top 10 or what have you, but we do a pretty poor job of defining what we do in a code review. I mean, we can talk about a course all day long, but that's kind of that baseline that everyone has a different definition for. And I think that's what you're going back to is, hey, what is it that you're doing? If you call this a secure code review and it's actually not, you're doing yourself a disservice and you're doing the company a disservice, right?
Right. And part of the review is like, so having everybody should have a checklist. You should have a checklist of things you look for. You just should, and you should have an approach, right? Some methodology. If you've been doing this long enough, you should. So at least when you are doing your review, you can like dump out something that there's a few reasons. One is it shows exactly what you reviewed, gives, like you said, somebody an idea of what a code review actually entails, like the layout of why it takes some time, right? And then also like a person that comes back, and this happened at work actually as of today. Somebody was reviewing an update to a feature I reviewed and had to go back to my notes and was like, oh, you checked these things, but so then I know that these things that were added, I didn't actually, or haven't been reviewed because they didn't exist at the time of your review. So now I know here's sort of the diff between that, right? To get a comprehensive review that's going to find some of the most damaging, the things that usually, okay, there are the cases where someone's just running outdated software, but there are also the times where it's pretty, how many breaches have we seen that are just IDOR related? They're just insecure direct object reference issues and could have been caught with a semi-thorough review, right? But again, relying on a tool to do, hey, we've got 300 apps that we're reviewing and we only have 4 people on the team, so this is how we're going to do it. Well, that's crap. You absolutely need to prioritize. And I think I had this conversation with one of the students in our class who was a manager, and my response to that was, you should totally prioritize what apps you care about. I was like, well, we're we do X, so we care about them all. And it was like, yeah, but how many you have a finite amount of resources. You have to prioritize. You just have to. And that's the same thing when we talk about doing code reviews in a 40 versus 80 hour sort of timeline. You have to prioritize exactly what you're going to review if you're limited on time, but you should at least have enough time. The most important thing is to get the context of the application you're reviewing. Otherwise, these sort of logic flaws, IDOR, business related abuse cases, those things you just have to understand the application. I know it's a long-winded rant, but
no, I would even step back a little bit from even code reviews to a full application assessment, right? is if you don't have time to understand what an application does and how it's used, you're never going to actually find those esoteric vulnerabilities, the ones that are more difficult to see, because it's all based on knowing how that application works. And like I still to this day still get tossed stuff that people want reviewed in 2 to 3 days, and it's some couple 100,000 lines of code, and there's all these different functions within it, and it's difficult to actually say, hey, like I can't actually get through this, right? You can give me that much code, and you can give me a couple of things that I can look at. Like I can look at the authentication system, right? I know that there's going to be some sort of authentication, but I'm not going to be able to find every single instance of IDOR, because I don't have the time to actually trace that down, and I don't have an understanding of the application well enough to find those edge cases where they probably exist. And it doesn't matter if it's code review. It doesn't matter if it's an assessment, right? It's just like an automated tool isn't necessarily going to give you that same coverage. Sorry, go ahead, Ken.
No, I liken it to, it's exactly what you said. You got 2 to 3 days, and you can hit certain points, but there's a whole range of things. If you got 100 endpoints and you can only trace like the 30 that are the most important, you've got 70 unreviewed endpoints, right? Or URLs. And it's the same thing. Like I just had painters in my house, and I had painters this time that were professionals, that I paid well, that took a lot of time. And it was difficult because I had to move my entire house around, and it took like, we'll say 3 days, right? In reality, it's like probably like going to be 5 days, right? I've had painters doing the same or similar rooms before, the same and similar rooms, and they did it all in 1 day. Care to guess what the cost was? Differential is pretty significant. There's a big difference, right? Well, you get what you pay for, I guess, is my point. They came in here for a day. They didn't fix the dents in the wall. They didn't fix the nails that were popping from the house having settled. They didn't come through and make sure that the walls were even. They didn't, do all this sanding and, they didn't do 2 layers of paint. So I got what I paid for, and we had to come back and get this repainted because of that. So, but this time actually spend the money and the time and go through the effort to actually get it done right. And it's the same thing with code reviews. It's very easy with something like that, where you can say like, oh, I can totally visually understand why I'm going through this level of effort. I'm paying this amount of money, that it is this difficult, versus, what we do, which is, again, going back to documenting everything you do so that it's visually, people understand what you're doing. Because it is so abstract and hard to quantify.
Yeah, and actually, I found that as I'm performing reviews, right? If I'm not given the time that I feel that I really need with an assessment, with a code review specifically, I have a harder time digging in and actually trying to find vulnerabilities, right? I think it's just something to do with the fact that I'm like, guess what? I'm not going to be able to actually find the things that I need, and I don't have the time to do it. So it's harder for me to get motivated to jump in and say, all right, we're going to actually, dig in and find what we can, because I know that there's stuff that I'm missing. Right. There's almost a psychological aspect, at least for me, that I can't, I don't understand all this code, so I'm just doing X, Y, and Z. So does it really matter that I looked at it? Because I'm going to have to come back through at some point, or somebody is, to do a full review. And if we don't, then we're all going to miss things.
Yeah. And if you're a manager, I mean, one way I can just honestly say, I can't imagine you're retaining the top talent if the goal is to do the most basic level of coverage to CYA, except for you're not really doing anything other than checking a box, like you're not actually improving your security posture. Who's going to want to work there? How are you going to retain talent? You know what I mean? So yeah, I guess that's sort of my rant for the night on and I honestly, I would love to put this into a talk with data points and make it very clear and use, you know, like facts and logic and reasoning to lay out a case for, and not even lay out a case, but like make it clear on why this is so important. So maybe I don't know, maybe Seth will talk through that and figure something out.
Yeah, because it would be interesting, right? Like I think both of us have experience doing, hey, if I've only got 1 to 2 days, this is what I look at, right? This is the value that a company is getting out of an assessment, period. Or from a code review. And then base that, compare that with 40 or 80 hours of actually like how much time is spent learning the context of an application. That's one of the things that we do in our course that I really like is like we spend so much time profiling an application, figuring out what it does, right? Like ignoring the whole security aspect and talking about learning what a code base is. There's so much time that's spent on that, and there's so much value that's included in it where it doesn't necessarily fall into a security specific realm. Yeah, we identify some security functions in there, but a lot of the time in a code review and in an assessment is spent familiarizing yourself with an application. So
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, to be clear, this is something I'm ranting about from past experiences, but also more relevant. A friend was kind of complaining about this, and then it made me think about the students we talked to, and I was like, we should address this because like it is super annoying when I hear about people's experiences where they act like this is some, treating it like a commodity skill, like it's just something you can just throw 10 hours at this. It's just not how it works. So anyways,
yeah, I'm gonna post a link, right? It's from smartbear.com. It's talking about effective peer code reviews, right? So we can extrapolate this out to secure code reviews, but this is just recommendations that are given to developers on how to perform a peer code review, right? So let me drop this in Slack and on the YouTube channel really quick.
It looks like
interesting thing is the first point right there. So if you pull that up, Ken.
Oh yeah.
The first point is review fewer than 400 lines of code at a time, right? So, you're never going to, as a secure code reviewer, you're never going to just review 200 to 400 lines of code. I don't think that's ever been, that's ever been a code review.
Although 200 to 400 lines of Ruby code is equivalent to about 10 to 20,000 lines of Java. So
that's true. Well, that's because you've got all the libraries and everything else that Ruby does because it's so special. But like the thing from that first point as well, or the second time is right. Inspection rates should be under 500 lines of code per hour. That's kind of a good rule of thumb when doing a secure code review. 500 lines of code is actually something that you can grok, right? You can figure out what an application is doing. But the number of times that I've been thrown 200, 300,000 lines of code and given only a few days to actually, review it, like I don't have that level of, I've never been given that level of inspection time, right? Or that inspection rate. I think at best, I usually get about 1,000 lines of code per hour.
Yeah, because I was doing the math, and if you could do, like, let's say every hour you're billing, you're doing 500 lines of code, then you're talking about 40,000 lines of code in a 2-week period, in an 80-hour period, which is when you get, typically as a consultant, especially when you get 2 weeks, you're expected to take on site code bases much larger than that. Let's be honest.
Yep.
And then there's the assumption that that's okay. Where's the time for report writing? Where's the time for getting to know the application and doing your homework on the tech stack? Because like the tech stack, you have to know what are the vulnerabilities that are specific to this tech stack? How does it do routing? How does the controller authorization decorators work? How do the models enforce certain validations if they are enforcing any? How does the ORM work? Are there any vulnerable calls in that ORM? So now you're
Yeah, and you're going back to like how Ruby functions, like what middleware is being used, because normally the lines of code is the custom lines of code. It's not anything like any third-party code that they're depending on that has a significant security impact on that application. So,
And Toller mentions a good point here, which is like when you're going head to head, like this goes down to like the whole I presume anyways, like the whole consulting winning business part, sorry, sales. And when you're going against a company that's saying like we can do specifically, it says there's also folks that deliver those web inspection reports as assessment results. And if you're competing against that speed, explaining the value is tough on an initial engagement. And I absolutely agree. Like it is difficult to, it's something you and I have done over and over again, is explain that value in our, well, I guess you're still doing consulting, but in my consulting day. And like, yes, it's very hard because you'll get lowball. You get folks that'll lowball first of all, at like a much lower rate. They'll say they can do it for half the time, and it's just like the painter situation I was talking about. You know, it's you get what you pay for.
yep.
And so you have to explain your value in a way that people can understand. Like, there's a difference between you finding something, like this person finding something easy, and also like it ever getting fixed. There's the one part of us finding things, and there's another part that like you have to explain. First of all, you have to hand something to people that's actionable, that's prioritized, that has good recommendations, something they can act on. And if you hand them a big report with nothing prioritized, with false positives all over the place, you're actually causing more cost in the long run for their development team. And that's, if you ever want to have a selling point, that's one of them, is you can reduce the amount of cost on the and burden on the business to actually like take care of your shit results.
Well, and we've all and we've all dealt with that before, right? Like we've dealt with the development teams that don't want to deal with security because that's all they're given is, hey, here's a report from an automated tool. Like, I know I bag on Fortify and AppScan quite a bit. I mean, they do a decent job at identifying things, but the number of false positives that they come out with, especially if they haven't been tuned, are ridiculous, right? No developer has time to comb through 25 to 30,000 findings in a week, right? They just can't do that. But that is the reason why development and ops and everybody like looks down on security, is because we're not necessarily enabling them to make more secure code. We're actually adding more work to their workload without giving them a reasonable way to go about fixing it. And, without some sort of expertise, without somebody that's actually digging in and providing those results, it's just never going to happen. So,
yeah.
Anyway.
But it's not all bleak. There are good clients out there. There are folks that understand the value and what you provide. There are folks that have developers totally on board and wanting you to find things. And also, side note, you should always ask developers what they're most concerned about when you're doing those calls. When you're gauging an app, you should always ask developers, what are you most worried about? Because usually developers have usually at least there's some. With good developers, there's some notion of what they should be concerned about. And it's a good, I think you've talked about this, Seth, for sure.
No, a good developer, like if you're scoping out an application and you want to know where the dirty laundry is, right? Or, after you start an application, ask the developers. I mean, if you have a good rapport with them and you're like, hey man, I know you're probably not given enough time to fix everything that you want. Where do you have concerns from a security perspective? Those lead developers will tell you in a second, because they're never given the actual cycles. I mean, this goes back to like a 2-week sprint. They're never given the cycles to actually go back through a lot of that where they do have concerns, and they're usually going to be helpful in pointing you in the right direction. Because they want actionable results as well. They don't want another report that's not going to help them, that they're not going to be able to fix. They want to take pride in their work. I mean, I've never met a developer that just didn't care, right? That's a very creative process, and they're usually pretty invested. It's usually the opposite, right? you walk in and say they have SQL injection, and you just told them that their mom is ugly, right? Or their baby is, is
Yeah.
deformed, right? That's really how they take it, right? They take it very personally, and you need to be an ally to them, even as a consultant.
Yeah, and there's no golden rule. Everybody's different. Every developer's different, but you're right. It's usually I find a lot less apathy than I do sort of it being very. But you're right also in the fact like they're constrained just in the way that we are too. There's time constraints on them as well, and there's certainly things where I'm like, I've written code where I'm like, oh man, I wish I had more time to go back and do these things and focus on these things because like I know that there's something that could break, but you're just getting it done, and that's the reality. It's not. It's just mistakes happen, and that's why we're here. And everybody needs a little bit of time. So the other thing I wanted to, or I kind of wanted to switch to, was Equifax. Okay. Talk a little bit about that Equifax report that came out. Justin Larson, as a matter of fact, was the one, Evan Johnson was the one who originally linked it. But I think there were a couple points that Justin and some other folks brought out. So do you want to talk through that a little bit?
Sure. You want to post up the report? So it's basically from the House, right? That's where it is, oversight.house.gov. So it's quite long, right? Something,
U.S. House of Reps Committee on Oversight and Government Reform.
There you go. Yep. So, and this probably goes back to the fact that Equifax is a pseudo government organization, right? Or at least they've got some sort of ties into the government, and they want to make sure that our data is protected. So they're looking into what actually happened. And yeah, it's 100 pages or so. You can read all of the specifics, but the executive summary in and of itself is pretty telling about Equifax and like the deficiencies that existed when the breach actually happened. Right. Like, first of all, right off the bat, what was it?
The 300 security certificates?
Yeah. The 300 outdated security certificates that were found. And it was Mandiant that did the actual analysis, forensic analysis on the breach. If you don't know who Mandiant is, go look them up. They're a security consulting firm, and there's a few of them that always seem to be involved in the forensics around breaches. But the one that I actually wanted to call out, so there's 300 expired certificates that they were actually able to find. The attackers sent something like 9,000 queries against 48 databases over the course of how many months was it? 4 or 5
I think it was
months?
just it wasn't the longest period, but yeah, it was enough to get it says here somewhere on the amount of like PII that was actually stolen. It was crazy. And oh man. And so they were able to access 48 other databases outside of the PII, the database holding the PII. They did this. They used a web shell. So it says, by the way, it sent 9,000 queries on 48 databases, locating the unencrypted personally identifiable information data 265 times. And what's crazy is that, let's see, they didn't, oh man, this just gets, so the device used to monitor their network traffic that would have caught this had been inactive for 19 months. And that was due to an expired security certificate.
Yep.
And then,
so let's see. Okay. So the attackers began the attack on May 13th, and they didn't notice, Equifax didn't notice it until July 29th, because they finally went and updated that expired certificate, right? So they saw the suspicious web traffic to that web shell that had been uploaded on the 13th. So that's May, June, July. So it's only like 2.5 months, but that's more than enough time to actually export all that information, right? And that's where we get into the issues, is that, yeah, it was long gone by the time they actually detected it.
I think what's interesting is they Equifax actually did if there's any solace to take out of this, is that they actually did contact the FBI, because if you haven't knowing ongoing, if you know of a breach is underway or you've been breached or something, you're actually supposed to, if you're, obviously a US based company, you're actually supposed to talk to the FBI. They've got a whole cyber division for this. What does that always happen? Absolutely not. But if you get the FBI involved, your information is going to end up out there. You have to accept that. You now are allowing the government to come in there. But from what I understand, it's super helpful in actually pursuing action. They have a good team, and it's just something you should do. And I think that Equifax is right to do that, and that's one of the pieces of silver lining here. However, I think when you read this report, because it talks about having overly aggressive growth leading to a overly complex IT system that is woefully in terms of being monitored, in terms of having the staff, in terms of even knowing their network, just totally not. It's terrible. I mean, the story this paints is bad. And I think that if it harkens back to reading the Phoenix Project, that's what I thought. The second I read this summary here of this very, very, very long report.
So for those people that aren't, no, I do, but why do you find that, right? Kind of draw the parallels there between what Equifax did and what's actually in the Phoenix Project.
Well, for one, let's talk about the outdated systems that couldn't be updated because they were so outdated. I mean, I think one of the interesting points was that I believe that some of the systems they mentioned were implemented in the 70s. Let's start there. And that's definitely, in the Phoenix Project, they talk about having only this set of people that can work on these machines, but they really can't update them. They're super fragile and brittle. And I feel like that's what we're talking about right here, is the super fragile and brittle system that probably only a handful of people have an expertise in, and needs to be updated to be a little bit more rugged.
Yeah. So, I mean, that harkens back to mainframe systems for sure. And if you've been in the industry and you've dealt with any large financial institution that's been around for, decades, you are going to run into this exact scenario. I can't tell you the number of times that I've, done assessments on banks and they just basically, hey, that's not in scope. We can't actually do anything about it. We don't have the code for that anymore because somebody compiled it and put it on the, mainframe. So we can't actually make fixes or patches to it. And that application's going to run because it's more important than anything else that we do here. Right.
Yeah. And you see here that they mention that there is a legacy modernization effort underway. Unfortunately, it's coming during the breach, or really when it's completed is well after the breach. And it's the same thing they talk about in the book. And the book is an example of modern corporate this, right? So they do have at least an effort to improve that. Yeah. But in terms of managing these various systems, it just, they talk about it in the report. These aren't my words. This is reading directly off the report, where it's basically there's no accountability. People don't know in terms of leadership who owns what. So Equifax failed to fully appreciate and mitigate its cybersecurity risks. Again, not what I'm saying. I'm reading directly off the page. So there was a management problem in IT, but there was also a business issue where they were being overly aggressive, and so there were limitations on what could get done. So it's just just when you read this, it's just a mix of different things going wrong as a business, and then a security breach happens on top of that.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I do want to call out, like we're looking over the Equifax, like the results of the Equifax report, right? I don't necessarily I find it good that they've actually called out the aggressive growth strategy and the old, like the antiquated systems, that it's not necessarily the people that are working there right now. I don't know if you've ever seen a grifter, Neil, actually talk. Ken, I mean, he's local to me here. He runs DC 801, but he's also one of the guys that, he's one of the main organizers of DEF CON, right? And he's been doing that and running the Black Hat Network for years. But one of the things that he always calls out is that like we have a tendency to not support the people that are in the trenches as an industry. Like this report definitely does, because it says, look, it's not on the security guys that were there, right? Yes, they probably should have updated that certificate, but most likely they weren't given the time to actually do what they should have been doing, right? But as an industry, we have a tendency to be like, oh crap, look at that breach. How did that happen? And then we're like, okay, are we good, right? Am I okay? Does this affect me? And if it doesn't, then there's a lot of finger pointing, and we're like, ha ha ha, we're going to pile on. And we're going to be like, hey, you guys suck, and that person should be fired, and X, Y, and Z, right? When realistically, we don't have a full picture of what's going on within the organization and the support that the security team is getting, or the product security team, or whoever is getting to actually fix those vulnerabilities, right? We just talked about code reviews and how we don't give the security team enough time to actually perform an assessment. Yeah, this was struts in this case, right? But obviously they weren't, like Equifax, the guys that should have been scanning that network for struts vulnerabilities were never given the opportunity to go through and do that.
Well, and all the application security managers that we've interviewed on this podcast and asked for their 30, 60, 90-day plan, I'd say most of them talk about relationship building. And I think that goes to what you just said, where you do that because you do want the business to care about what your security team's doing and to take it seriously. If they choose to not do that, if they choose to prioritize this over that, what can you do? But you can certainly advocate for your team and advocate for certain things for you to be included when, new features or new products are being developed or major changes are being made. And building those relationships so that people do reach out to you, even if, like the formal process has slipped up and missed something, somebody reaches out to you. I think that's ultimately what they're trying to do. However, no matter how good of a manager you are, and no matter, how well you've built those relationships, you're right. I mean, it could be that, oh, well, like this time, this is not the priority. This other thing is the priority. We need to do this X, Y, Z on these dates, and we understand the risks and we take it on. And, you can lay it out and present the case and build it up, but doesn't mean anybody has to listen. So
yep.
The assumption being that they did something wrong is wrong.
Yeah. And I do think that we're getting better at that, right? Like we've got a lot more focus on blue teams, right? And actually defensive measures and, the ability to scan. But then, we hear from, other people in the consulting world about, 3 days to do a code review on an application that they've never seen before. And that doesn't harken back to the company actually taking security seriously, right?
No.
It's a checkbox, it's a compliance check, and it doesn't necessarily equate to real security. The company may get away with it for a long time until they do get hit by a breach like Equifax did. But at some point that's going to come around and bite them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. So that's why you also have to kind of play this game of like, in your career, being a little bit choosy where you work too. Right. Because as you progress, and there's more and more responsibility on your shoulders, you have to be choosy about where you invest your energy and your time, because you want that to be a mutually beneficial relationship, but also that you can avoid ending up being on the front page of Wired or TechCrunch or whatever. or not dark reading, something like that.
Take your pick. Medium nowadays, right? Medium.
There you go. Oh yeah, medium. Sorry.
Yeah. Whichever one it is, or on Pastebin. Yeah. Like, and I don't know. I just, like, as I read through that report, that's what it makes me feel for, is those guys that are in the trenches that are just like, oh man, what now, right? Even though those are the guys that we probably should be hiring. Hey, guess what? We've been through this. We know that this is an issue. Like, if you want to walk somebody in and be like, hey, they were there during the Equifax breach when it actually happened, that would be an interesting perspective to have, talking to your executives, right? About what the real consequences are of ignoring you or ignoring the security team. So,
if you think identifying all the websites that your company has running is difficult, imagine doing all of that, handling all of that infrastructure, monitoring it all, and when a certificate expires, knowing, it's just a very difficult job. It's just a very difficult job. So yeah. But reading this, it does not feel like necessarily it feels more like when you read it, like there's more of a,
that is definitely what it feels like, right? As they just weren't ever given the time. I mean, the whole 300 certificates that are out of date, and then like 80 of them, 79 of them were for monitoring business critical domains, right? It's a lack of real oversight and leadership in the security space, and probably the IT space as well. But you're going to find that at any large organization. I don't think Equifax is that. I don't feel like they are an outlier, right? Yeah, they got burned this time, but we see the number of breaches that are coming, and somebody else is going to be next.
Yeah, no. I mean, just imagine we've all tried to get systems updated to, like, we're talking about, in the relative scheme of things, fairly minor updates of like libraries and whatever frameworks, language updates, whatever. And imagine you've got this ACIS system from 1970, built in the 1970s, running Apache struts. It was probably a miracle they got Apache struts running on there to begin with, let alone some updated version. So you can only imagine what that, if there was a battle, what that would have felt like if they had, tried to get it updated, I guess.
Yeah.
If it was even
exactly. I mean, Ken had he was saying, we'd rather fire the security people that were there when the breach happened. And that, we typically look for a scapegoat, but we choose the wrong scapegoat is really what, I mean, that's what Neil is trying to say, is we're choosing the wrong scapegoat. You just paid a huge price to actually teach your security team how to act in a fire, right? Like an absolute dumpster fire. And then you're going to go and fire the leader that's actually led them through it because he happened to be the CISO or whatever it is. That's the wrong way to look at it, right? At that point, I would think that's the guy that you want to make sure stays on staff so it doesn't happen again. Anyway, we are definitely going down rants today, aren't we?
Yeah, tonight's the night of ranting. Tis the season. No, actually, Sean was going to join us tonight. And it turns out, Seth, he had emailed us during the podcast saying that he could join, but we were in the middle of it already. But we'll get him rescheduled on here. And if you're not familiar with Sean, he's the AppSec essentially lead, right, at Oath. He runs bug bounty and product security pieces for Oath, and formerly AOL, and he ran like global AppSec at AOL.
Yeah, Sean's a good guy. He's got an interesting perspective where he's not as technical as URI. He's definitely come up more through kind of the management track and been running teams and trying to implement product security. So it'd be interesting to see what his experience is with that large organization, especially as AOL and Yahoo have merged, how to build that out, running a large scale bug bounty program. I mean, GitHub is pretty big from a bug bounty perspective, but Oaths is pretty huge because of the number of properties that it covers. It's not just Yahoo and AOL, but it's all their mail sites and everything else that they do, TechCrunch, Huffington Post, all that stuff. So it'll be fun to talk to him about how that all happens. Maybe we'll do like a half hour, in a couple nights to actually bring him on, or we can reschedule him another time. So.
Yeah, that sounds good. Also, I am having to figure out why this camera angle is not switching. So I'm just manually switching it right now for when we talk. Anyways, did you want to wrap up with anything, since we're over an hour here and we can call it, I think?
I did want to call out AppSec Cali. That's what, the third week in January. It's coming up soon. We are doing our secure code review course. Come and attend that. It's a good price for the secure code review course. We'll be there for the conference as well. I think that's really the only thing that's on my docket right now. I don't necessarily have any other conferences on my radar yet. We have submitted to a couple of places. B-Side Salt Lake City is in February. I'm sure I'll be there. But other than that, I don't have a lot I haven't identified any others that I necessarily have submitted to. So what about you, Ken? If you have anything on your list?
No. Besides what I've submitted with you, other than this idea today of wanting to promote, basically build a talk that people can point to the businesses and say, or whoever they need to point to it and say, here is here's a talk that at least lays out what code reviews consist of, and assessments and stuff like that, and why it should take some time and stuff like that. But yeah, nothing else. I'm trying to think of anything else. I got the t-shirts. I think you mailed out some t-shirts to some folks already.
Yeah. Yep. And so we'll keep sending those along. Like you said, hit us up on Twitter or on Slack for sizes and locations as we send them out. But otherwise, we'll be back on next week. Trying to even remember who our guest is next week.
Oh, it's Will Bankston. Yeah.
Awesome. And that'll be our last one for the year. That'll wrap up season 1 of Absolute AppSec. And then we'll kick off again. I think it's the 8th of January with the guys from Segment. So that should be fun as well. But next week will be our last episode for this year. We may throw in some extra ones. We'll talk to Sean. We'll see when we can actually get him on to talk through things. Otherwise, thanks for being a part of Absolute AppSec, during the first season, and hit us up, find us on the interwebs, and we'll chat.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night.